welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host, Kirill, and today we have a returning guest on the channel, Professor Ivanov from the University of Cincinnati. Professor, how are you doing today?
Hey, Kirill, I'm doing excellent, and I want to thank you and for the opportunity to be a guest on your podcast again, and also to want to thank your viewers for putting up with me and bearing with me.
Absolutely. No, glad to have you back, and today we're going to discuss few topics. We have some developments here with some more congressional resolutions here in the United States. We're going to talk about some of the diaspora groups and some of the updates with those, MPO, UMD, and whatnot, and then jump on some other topics related to Macedonia and its EU accession process. I think those are kind of the main things that we had on the table for discussion today. So before we start, I saw you recently on Kanal Pit, Channel 5 on the show Samovistina. This time you were debating Todor Chapraganov, the famous or infamous Macedonian historian. So how was that?
I enjoyed that very much. I thought we had a very lively discussion. I would have loved to have it more than 1 hour, maybe another 1 hour, not 2 hours. Unfortunately, we're only limited to about an hour, but I think it was a fun experience. By the way, Professor Cipriano gave me a very dear gift, and so I want to thank him for that. And I don't know if he's going to watch this. I don't have a way of directly contacting him, but I hope, and I want to thank him for this wonderful gift, which we're going to use today to show the ethnogenesis and the genesis of the first ethnic Macedonians in the United States. It was a wonderful resource. I also want to take an opportunity to call on Professor Cipriganov and all the historians to put their mouth where their writing is. In other words, if the documents are saying certain patterns, and they are, and this is issued in Skopje by the State Archive, then I want to call on them to start telling the Macedonian public, the public in the Republic of North Macedonia, what is actually in these archives, what is in these documents, because what is in this document. So I'm sure he knows the truth.
So what is the book specifically, just so we know?
So this is about the Macedonian immigration in the United States and Canada. It was issued in 2021 by the this is a Yugoslav diplomatic correspondent. So this was basically the Belgrade, and it was issued by the State Archives of the Republic of North Macedonia. It clearly shows who MPOs were. Yes, they were Macedonians, and they were Makedonstvashti, so they were working on the Macedonian cause, but they were clearly with a very powerful, robust Macedono-Bulgarian identity. So it's not just Bulgarian, Macedono-Bulgarian identity. And it shows also how the the Yugoslav diplomats tried to influence them by basically finding individuals who have financial troubles and then taking over their mortgage payments or their loan payments, and then directing them what positions to take within MPO. Usually it kind of didn't succeed very much, But it also talks about the Macedonian National League, which was an organization established in the late 20s. This was in the 1930s, and the Macedonian National League was sort of this left-wing, working-class, pro-communist organization and socialist and left-leaning organization. And actually this is the group that we could see clearly, not clearly in the beginning, but toward the late 1930s, adopting already a Macedonist vision about what we call ethnogenesis, the origins, the modern day, present day Macedonian, ethnic Macedonian identity. And it's all wonderfully documented and issued by the State Archives in Skopje. So I'm very grateful for that information,
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you had a great time on there, and hopefully they'll invite you back, because I always find your discussions on that show very interesting. So I was glad to see you on there talking with Todor. So let's start today with some of the developments here in the States. As my viewers may recall, it was, I believe, early last year, early 2022, when there was a House resolution. I have a copy of it here.
Mhm.
Yes, House Resolution 741
Mhm.
of the 117th Congress of the United States. And this was a resolution for establishing or designating September 2022 as Macedonian American Heritage Month.
Mhm.
And um, myself and the MPO, particularly MPO Pete in the Chicago chapter,
Mhm.
took a um,
Mhm.
issue with this resolution for a number of reasons. And as I said, it wasn't at that time when I made that video, my issue with the resolution wasn't with the establishment of a Macedonian American Heritage Month per se. I don't really have a problem with people who consider themselves ethnic Macedonians, celebrating their heritage and the accomplishments they've achieved here in the United States.
Mhm.
That wasn't the issue. The issue was that there were numerous people in the resolution called out by name who we know did not consider themselves ethnic Macedonians, despite the fact that they are
Mhm.
or were from Macedonia. The number of
Mhm.
people in here um, were self-declared ethnic Bulgarians, Macedonian Bulgarians,
Mhm.
and the issue with the resolution was that after their death, as Macedonians tend to do, they switched the ethnic identity from Bulgarian to
Mhm.
Macedonian. Um, there was, looking through the list here, Stoyan Christo was one person I,
Mhm.
took issue with them categorizing as an ethnic Macedonian. Um, there was the Kitagiev
Mhm.
brothers who come from your neck of the woods down in
Mhm.
Cincinnati, who I
Mhm.
think it's very clear that they identified as ethnic Bulgarians.
Mhm.
You had Dr. Peter
Mhm.
George, who not too long ago, shortly before his death, which I can't recall, I think it was maybe 2017, if my memory serves correctly, wrote an article in the Macedonian Tribune, basically making it extremely clear that he's not an ethnic Macedonian, but an ethnic Bulgarian. But nevertheless, in this House resolution, he was um, grouped in with ethnic Macedonians and whatnot. Um, and we also had the starting off with the dubious myth of uh, Dragan of Ohrid, the supposed ethnic Macedonian on board one of Columbus's ships in 1492. So there was a lot of historical issues with that House resolution, which ultimately went nowhere. It kind of stalled out in the
Mhm.
Congress and was ultimately a big defeat for the UMD, for the United Macedonian Diaspora, who was pushing the House resolution. And in fact, um, the UMD included themselves in the resolution itself. It makes reference to the UMD, but not the MPO, which when we're talking about
Mhm.
Macedonian American heritage, I think
Mhm.
it's a bit inappropriate to include one
Mhm.
organization and not include one that has much deeper historical roots here in the United States and has done much more, arguably, for people from Macedonia in the US
Mhm.
as opposed to the UMD. So that resolution died last year. However, now we have a new resolution. This is
Mhm.
Senate Resolution
Mhm.
311. This was introduced into the Senate uh, as opposed to the House, the Senate being the more senior House
Mhm.
of Congress in the United States. And this one was introduced by Senator Mike Braun from Indiana on
Mhm.
July 26th of this year, 2023, and is much shorter. It's a much shorter resolution,
Mhm.
and it basically is much more vague,
Mhm.
not as descriptive as to who these Macedonian
Mhm.
Americans are. Because in the first resolution, the House resolution, we actually have a long list of specific names and people. I'm not going to read through all of them, but it calls out dozens of people by name and their um, accomplishments in the United States, whereas the Senate resolution, which was recently introduced, just kind of makes vague references to areas of um, study and whatnot. For example, it just says Macedonian entrepreneurs, Macedonian American athletes, Macedonian American artists, without calling people out by name. I think
Mhm.
that was probably in a way to avoid some of the controversies that arose by specifically calling out people by name, which was the case in the House resolution. Although there's still some problems with it because it makes reference to Macedonian Americans winning medals in the Olympic Games. But the only Macedonian American I'm aware of who won medals at the Olympic Games was, again, Dr. Peter
Peter
George, who's not an
George.
ethnic Macedonian. So it took his name out, but are still,
Yeah.
referencing him. less explicitly. So there's still some issues with the resolution, although it is dramatically improved, I would say, based on the first one. But I'm not sure how involved the UMD is in the second Senate resolution. I don't know what information you have, but they were quite, the UMD was quite vocal when the House resolution came out last year. They were kind of publishing news about it on their website, on the UMD website. But as far as the Senate resolution, I haven't heard anyone from the UMD promoting it. There's no news about it on their website. I haven't heard anyone come out promoting it. So I don't know how involved the UMD is in this Senate resolution. Do you have any information on that?
So I have a little bit, not too much, but I also can see patterns of American politics that have emerged since then. So it's clearly that an interest group of Macedonian Americans, particularly there is one compact Macedonian American community in the great state of Indiana in its northwestern corner, near the Chicago metro area, that has introduced that. I don't want to go into the details about it, but first of all, you got to understand how American politics and the process of American politics works. Interest groups introduce this kind of documents on a regular basis, and they recognize the accomplishments of different communities around the globe, in Central America, Caribbeans, in different individuals of European descent, of Asian Americans, broadly defined, in different groups within Asian American communities, Africa, etc. So this is a normal process. Of course, its interest groups have to introduce them. And you got to understand that senators, 100 of them that we have, they're not going to sit down and read carefully each resolution or each piece of legislation. Most of them are, in fact, unaware of that legislation that is proposed, and as long as it doesn't look controversial, there's like a low level staffers. Now, you don't expect a staffer working for the Senator Braun's, particularly a low level staffer and mid level staffers, in his home office, in his different offices across the state, to know the history of the population, which we will discuss in a few minutes, the population censuses in different parts of the world with regard to ethnic Macedonians.
Sure.
And so they, of course, looked at it, and the resolution looks, on first reading, it looks quite okay. First of all, I want to say that we Bulgarians, Bulgarian Americans, Macedonian Bulgarian Americans have no problem. I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody, because I don't have that. I don't think anybody has the right to speak on behalf of everybody, but I can speak on behalf of majority of the people, particularly Bulgarian American community, particularly modern Bulgarian American immigration in the last 30 years, would have no problem recognizing that there are people who identify themselves as ethnic Macedonians. There's something distinct than Bulgarians. We respect, recognize it. We have no problem with that. And we would like to them to celebrate a month, whether it's in September or any other month, and we don't mind even actually celebrating it with them. If they want to separately or jointly, whatever way they want to. We're very supportive of that. I want to make that very, very clear. So the question is about the claims that resolutions make. So the first one was very easy to defeat, because the myth of Dragan of Ohrid, the great city of Ohrid, which was Alonso de Ojeda's, or was not, or maybe this myth this is no way you can put it in an official document.
I don't know where that myth, I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't know where that myth came from. I've seen
I know where it came.
Certain Croatian academics like years ago in like North America. Yeah. That's where I first seen it. I don't know what
I can tell you. Go ahead. It was Bulgarians who started that story. Okay. Again. And again, when we criticize Bulgarian Macedonian historiography, we have to be very honest. There's a lot of and pseudo historians in Bulgaria as well. There are claims of an individual in one of the TV shows on one of the TV stations in Bulgaria that Bulgarians fought in the Trojan War. And I'm like, dude, no, you don't understand. We are the oldest people on earth. There are people like this. That's
Was
the
the claim that
para.
there were Thracians in the Trojan War, or actual Bulgarians?
I will send you the video.
Okay,
I will
I'm interested.
leave it to you. I don't want to engage in that. So I'm a
Sure,
serious person. I deal with science. I don't deal with myths and jokes. So I take
sure.
those para historians as a joke. Sometimes I find them entertaining. I'm
Right,
more irritated with them now because Macedonist propaganda uses us like, look what your people
right.
are saying. So
Sure.
that myth, I think, was published. Somebody, I think it's Croatian academics and other
Right.
academics
That's
started
where I
it
first have seen it in English, is
in
from Croatian academics.
1987. What I know is one of the popular magazine in Bulgaria. It's called Paraleli, first published. You know what? Draganov Ohrid was actually the first. There was a Bulgarian on that crew, and it
Yeah.
was Draganov Ohrid, And then the Macedonians looked and said, wow, these guys claim that somebody from Ohrid is actually
Yeah.
Bulgarian. This is ridiculous. This is terrible. So they decided to
Planned it, yeah.
adopt that myth. Yeah. So, and it was very easy to, on an individual basis, to prove that there was at least 5 personalities, excluding Draganov Ohrid, but including the Kyrgyz brothers, who were engaged in that process, who were Macedonian Bulgarians who were included. So we kind of said, listen, we're upset with the fact that there is this tendency post-mortem to Macedonize,
Right.
people by removing their Bulgarian identity. And that's a problem not only with this resolution, that's a problem going on in North Macedonia, in the Republic today, where they're removing scripts from churches, where they're removing insignias from church bells, from gravestones, tombstones. They're removing stones installed in the early 20th century that were talking about Bulgarians there, and replacing them with the stones with the Antichki, the son of Kutlesh. This is revisionism, the kind of revisionisms that really irks us, irks me, irks everybody, and most importantly, this is a destruction of cultural heritage, and we have to call it as it is, so that was very easy to defeat. So they have decided to change the tactics and say, hey, we claim that the first Macedonians came around 1880s. Now,
Right.
we don't know what they mean by Macedonians, because Macedonians could mean people from the geographic region of Macedonia.
Right.
Macedonians could also mean ethnic Macedonians, and because it opens the venue, the leeway for interpretations, and I should say misinterpretations, that's why I would like to take the opportunity while I'm on your podcast to look at some of the documents,
Okay.
so to make sure that we know who are these Macedonians. So we're talking specifically about ethnicity or national feature. We're not talking about Macedonians from the geographic region of Macedonia. So in other words, people originating from the region. And we've made a significant progress, I should say, over the last years. First of all, we gave up the myth of Alexander, not we, but, in the Republic gave up this myth of Alexander the Great, I think. So we moved the origins of the Macedonians, particularly in North America, to about late 15th century. And now we're moving from the 15th, another 400 years, talking about late 19th century. So from Draganov Ohrid, Alonso de Ojedas, we're now back to the 1880s. And so that's the claim that says. Now, if there was just people from the geographic region of Macedonia, absolutely. But the wording implies ethnic Macedonians. And so what I wanted to look up is, let's see at some of the evidence about they originated from the geographic region of Macedonia. In the late 1880s, up until 1913, ethnic geographic region of Macedonia was part of the Ottoman Empire. So the only, as bad as they are, reliable sources about the national characteristics of the population were the Ottoman censuses. So there were two censuses during that period. The first one is 1881 to 1893. It took them 10 years to complete it. So
I'm just going to cut you off real quick. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think some people might be wondering why we're using the year 1880. that year comes specifically from the resolution itself.
Yes,
So
exactly.
the second paragraph of the resolution, after it's introduced, states, whereas since the 1880s, tens of thousands of Macedonians have immigrated to the United States, seeking civil liberties, human rights, religious freedom, economic opportunity, and security in response to the 1903 Ilinden Uprising against the Ottoman Empire, the 1912-1913 Balkan Wars, World War I, World War II, the 1946 to 49 Greek Civil War, and the communist policies of Yugoslavia. So just so there's no confusion, that's why we're using the year 1880. That's the year that the resolution references the start of Macedonian migration to the United States. But please continue.
Thank you so much. Yes, that was an important clarification, which I failed to do in the conversation. So if you look at this, this was the summary. The source is Professor Kartal, who published that in the 1980s from University of Wisconsin Press. So it gives us, as bad as it is, it may not be the perfect distribution of the perfect categorization, but this was how the Ottomans categorized people: Muslims, Greeks, Armenians, Bulgarians, Catholics, and there, of course, other minorities, but there were other groups, but there was no Macedonian distinct. So if you look clearly, large part of the what we call present-day Macedonians, but individuals from that period were identified as Bulgarians, particularly in the four main vilayets. These were Selanik or Salonika, Kosovo, or this was the Skopje main city, Monastir or Bitola, and of course Edrine, which is Adrianople or Odrin. So these were the main vilayets where Bulgarians were concentrated. Now you have to realize that there's Catholics. By Catholics includes also Greek Catholics and a lot of Uniates, a Uniate movement in Kukush, of which you've made also a whole separate video, so people should check it out. There's most likely one of my great-grandmother's, several of my great-grandmother's sisters also were not in the category of Bulgarians, were counted as Catholics, and you can see that sizable population because Kukush was in the Selani, Salonika vilayet. And so, yes, we also have a large sizable number of Greeks, and it's possible that many Grkomans or many Slavs who belong to the Greek, who went to the Greek churches were counted in that census as Greeks, as well as many Vlachs, many other identities that belong to this religious, to the Greek, the patriarchy church, and you can see that because if you compare also the numbers, particularly the numbers of Greeks versus Bulgarians in Monastir and in Kosovo. You will see in Kosovo probably not so many. This was probably most of those were Grkomans, what we call them. And in Monastir, it's a mixture, a hodgepodge, because they kind of give you almost like an even distribution between the Greeks and Bulgarians. And we know that ethnic Greeks were in the Monastir vilayet in the southern part, but it's hard to say that they were about half of the population. Anyway, so this was the first census, and the total number of ethnic Bulgarians 817,801, ethnic Macedonians 0.
I was recently, I forget what podcast or live stream I was watching, but it was some Macedonians talking, and then basically they were stating that our identity is reflected in the Ottoman censuses. We don't have to prove anything to anyone. The Ottoman census shows that there were majority Macedonians there. And I'm looking at the Ottoman census. I don't see a single Macedonian. So I'd like to see what Ottoman census they're referring to, because I've never seen ethnic Macedonians referenced in an Ottoman census before.
Yeah, I mean, they're going us to the extent that they're relativizing. So sure. It's a very relative thing, How do you find that? Well, this is not a national identity, but this is religion. Yes, religion is an essential part of the identity, and it's the institutions, the churches, the schools, the communities, of which again you've made several, I think, wonderful videos. Again, warmly recommended, and I showed some images. Those were the ones that were shaping identity, and according to the Ottoman census, again, it has its own imperfections, but again, you can see also that after the Linden Uprising, this was conducted 06-07, and it was the last census of the Ottoman Empire before it was pushed out. You can see that actually the number of ethnic Bulgarians has declined to about 761. 530. So it has declined by 50,000 over the course of about 1.5 decades. A lot of them were migrating, a lot of them were, and again, were pushed out. So it tells you also what was happening to the local population in the vilayets. Same vilayets, 3 vilayets here, because the administrative structure hasn't changed. And again, Greek Catholics, some of the people with Bulgarian identity or Macedonian-Bulgarian identity were counted as Greek Catholics. Now, we want to see also in the United States. We assume that, I didn't go back to look into all the censuses, but the last 2 censuses, the census of 1910 and the census of 1920, to see where these Macedonians are. And because the resolution recognizes Macedonian ethnicity, identity, language, and culture, we want to see that. In the US censuses, you don't have nationality as a characteristics, but you have country of origin and language spoken. And so in 1910, true, this is something that the Macedonian propaganda says, well, not propaganda, but there's people on the Macedonian side indicate that there was a note that for the enumerators, the census workers, who to count Macedonians not as Macedonians, but in one of the 4 major groups: Bulgarians, Greeks, Aromanians, Vlachs, Turks, etc. And in reality, that was how the census was executed, but there was a reason why this instruction was, because majority of them did in fact identify as such. And so you can see people originating from Bulgaria, living in the United States in 1910, what language they identified. So majority of them identified 95% Bulgarian. There was a small Jewish community, Yiddish, German, Greek, Italian, again, no Macedonian. In Serbia, again, Serbian, Romanian, Slovak, Croatian. Romanian, that's the Aromanians or the Vlachs, Croatian, here's Serbian and Croatian as a separate languages, already identified in 1910 in the census, Then you have the Europe not then you have, of course, Greece and Turkey, where you're most likely to find Macedonian as a language, and ethnic Macedonians. No mention of ethnic Macedonians in Greece, 1910, this was before the Balkan Wars, so Greece in its old borders up to Thessaly. And then Turkey in Europe, here you find Greek, yes, 12,000 people arrived speaking Greek. And then you have 5,807 Bulgarian, Syrian, Turkish, Albanian, again, no mention of Macedonian. So again, I'm trying to find Macedonian as a language to be able to recognize that in 1910, I find 0.
Okay,
but
so just to be clear, I mean, and just for the audience, people who maybe aren't aware of the time on here, 1910, basically the entire geographic region of Macedonia would fall into the category of Turkey in Europe at that point, being prior to the Balkan Wars. So whether it's Aegean, Vardar, Pyrenean Macedonia, all of that would be grouped into that category of Turkey in Europe. Now, I am seeing, this could be an argument made, I guess, but I'm seeing a category underneath Turkey in Europe that says Slavic not specified. I'm assuming Macedonians might say, aha, that's where we are, non-specified Slavs, since we're not Bulgarians, but from that region. What do you think that could be a reference to?
Somebody has to go and look up at the original. There are some documents from the actual census enumeration process. They have to look up to that. It is possible. Even if so, there is about 241 individuals who.
Right, I was going to say there's 241 unspecified Slavs to, what is that, 12,337 Bulgarians from that region. So we're talking, even if there are some people who are Slavic but don't identify as Bulgarians, we're talking about a kind of a minuscule fraction of the total population from that region.
And so I should say, actually, Bulgarian language was not by 60, but by 26. That was a typo that I've made. 26,000 people, 11,000 from Bulgaria, and 12,300 from Greece. So you can see that the number of actually people who, 5,000. No, my bad. Sorry, 5,000. It's correct. 10,000 from Bulgaria and 5,000. So of those 16,000, about 2/3 were from Bulgaria, proper 1/3 were from Turkey in Europe, from the Ottoman Empire, the people who immigrated. Now, if you also look at the population patterns, you will see that people from Turkey in Europe immigrated in a lot higher rate, particularly from Macedonia, from the Kostor, Vodin, etc. region, than from Bulgaria proper. And it tells you that they were fleeing from this oppression. And this was particularly the period, late 18, early 1900s, when Stoyan Christoph wrote his autobiography book, and he explains how people started discovering America and as an opportunity to immigrate, to look for economic opportunities, etc. You know, Granite City, Illinois, in St. Louis, Missouri. These were the areas when first Bulgarian communities, most vibrant Bulgarian communities, Macedono-Bulgarian communities, but they were identifying their language as Bulgarian. So they're from the geographic region of Macedonia, but we can recognize a separate, distinct Macedonian language at this point. Now, were they speaking something distinctly different from the way that these dialects are today? Well, probably as every dialect evolves, they were, but not that much, you know. But the language that they spoke, they often referred to it, the vast majority, as Bulgarian. So this is the important thing to understand, you know. Again, this is not a denial of present-day codification of the Macedonian, codified Macedonian language at all. I don't want to be blamed on that. This is just a trip back to the past and trying to find the benchmarks of when and how this term switched, what term was used in 1910 and how this term switched. And again, 10 years later, 1920, now it's the other way around. So you're seeing the language and you see the country of origin of individuals who have identified. So again, I've looked up at the Serbo-Croatian language. It originates from Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Greece, Russia, Romania, Canada, others. Now, this is already, borders have been shifted. Part of Macedonia has been for a long time. It clearly says that this reflects post-World War I borders. So a large part of Vardar Macedonia is part of the Vardar Banovina in Yugoslavia. Pirin Macedonia is obviously in Bulgaria, and then Aegean is already in Greece, you know. So we're seeing that Bulgarian was spoken in Bulgaria, 9,480. So it's about the same number that was in 1910, actually a little bit smaller number. And again, in Greece, this time people from Greece coming is smaller number than the number of individuals that came from the Ottoman Empire. You know, Turkey in Europe, which is the Ottoman Empire, 5,800. Now we have only 2,651. There's no instruction to not count Macedonian. Hence, Macedonian should have been counted. Again, we don't see any identification of an individual listed as Macedonian. But this time, I have a good number to consider that there was about 2,039 people who said that Slavic not specified. Most likely, if they identified as Macedonians, it should be, the language should be in the Slavic category. Hungary is mostly, these are Serbian-speaking and Slovak-speaking communities in Hungary. Austria, again, these are the Slovenian-speaking communities of Austria down in Klagenfurt, mostly. Now, none of those were ethnic Macedonians. None of those territories were included in the Macedonian nationalist claims, you know, Greater Macedonia. Germany, again, same thing. So we have other countries left, 48. So somewhere between 0 and 48 is likely the number of people who identified the language as Macedonian. We will never know unless somebody goes through all the population censuses and finds. Even if there were people who in 1920 identified, this is a very, very minuscule number, and we have to be blunt and honest. So the resolution also suggests a claim that there's half a million people that are descendants of Macedonians. Well, they're descendants from people who originate from the geographic region of Macedonia. But I doubt that out of 48 people, you could claim that there's 500,000 descendants today, if by 1920. Up to no more than 48 people. You know? So that creates, again, a lot of confusion and lack of clarity as to how the resolution was worded. And then I want to also go, hold on, last point of indication was the Yugoslav census. Ivo Banac published it. he drawing on the 1921 Yugoslav census, he did recognize, again, this was written in 1980s, that Macedonians, but he called them Macedonians or Bulgars. So in other words, he did not draw a distinction. And we know for sure that there was a 585,558, so 500,000 people, almost 600,000 people who were either Macedonians or Bulgars. And he clearly said that for him, Bulgars, because Bulgarians were the ones who lived on the territory of the kingdom at that time. And those Bulgarians who did not live on the territory of the kingdom, he referred to them as Bulgars, so that's the so-called Macedono-Bulgarians, again, documented by Ivo Banac as 585,000. So that actually poses some significant questions, Kirill, about the accuracy of the data presented in the resolution. We will certainly notify stakeholders about this, and I believe because of the, again, lack of clarity and precision in the resolution, this resolution will have exactly the same destiny as 741. That is, it'll stay in the Senate until next year, and then it'll die there. Again, not because we don't recognize Macedonian language identity, etc., but because it contains some factual inaccuracies about the origins, or as we call it, ethnogenesis of the language identity, etc., in the United States, as documented by the censuses in 3 different countries.
Yeah, I mean, the 500,000 number, I mean, to quote the resolution specifically, it says, whereas there are an estimated 500,000 individuals of Macedonian heritage living in the United States with sizable communities in the states of Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California. So I think it's making more of a present day calculation of 500,000 than a historical one. I don't know if that 500,000, how close that is to accurate. I don't think there's anywhere near 500,000 people currently living in the United States who consider themselves ethnic Macedonians. I think that's way too high. I don't know the exact number, but that seems extraordinarily large compared to the amount of Macedonians in Macedonia. I don't think there's 500,000 specifically just in the United States. I don't know if we're, the whole diaspora together, maybe, but I don't have a specific figure on that. I will say that when I saw the resolution come out on July 26th, it seemed rather ambitious due to the fact that it's basically attempting to designate September of 23 as Macedonian American Heritage Month. So basically, they're giving themselves 1 month to push this through the Senate. That's a rather quick time frame. So whoever attempting to push this forward must at the very least feel confident that they're going to be able to get it through in a month. I don't know if that's the case. It doesn't seem that is the case to me. But yeah, I guess I'll say I recently saw an interview with Mito Kolosky, the founder. I don't know what his current position is with the UMD. I think he's kind of backed off on direct leadership. I think I've seen some other people kind of take his place, but he's still, let's say, the person who's the public face of that organization to a large degree. He was recently in Macedonia on what shows? I know it's on Alpha. Is it Bogdan Ilievsky's?
The late night show with Bogdan Ilievsky.
Yes. He was on there, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago. And he was talking about, go ahead.
And I have an invitation to go there too, by the way.
Oh, excellent. I'm looking forward to that. So he was on there and he was basically promoting the fact that the UMD pushed through state level resolutions, Ohio, Michigan, although I think Ohio came out with a new resolution kind of backtracking on some of the excesses of the first resolution that the UMD put forward. But in any case, he didn't bring up the Senate resolution, the new Senate resolution at all, from my recollection in that interview. And it was basically, the interview came out around the same time that the resolution was made public. So you would think if the UMD was really pushing hard for it, that he would have made that public. He did state that he wasn't surprised that last year's House resolution failed. He basically said, well, we weren't even trying. That was kind of just, an attempt. Almost seemed like someone who went into a match hoping to win. Then once they lost, they're like, well, I never even wanted to win in the first place. So it kind of came off as a little childish the way he um, uh, stated that they had no intention of pushing for House Resolution 741 when it's self-evident that wasn't the case. There was a number of congressional members who they kind of tried to rally to their side to push that through. So, but I don't know. I didn't see any real publicity by the UMD or Mitokolsky in regard to the new Senate resolution. So that's why I was curious as to what extent they were involved or to what extent they're optimistic in regard to this resolution. But
I have the suspicion that they are aware that again, this new resolution entails some inherent problems from factual point of view, and that it will face some resistance. And my understanding is the only reason why you would introduce it in the 11th hour, if you're trying to get recognition for 2023, is that you're going to fail, but you want to make the noise, the buzz, about it. And that's exactly what happened in the if you follow Macedonian media and news, that's what they're going to say. It's the US Congress is going to officially, finally, ultimately, decisively recognize that Macedonians exist, and that the Linden Uprising is Macedonian. It's not clear what they imply by Macedonian, but mostly they imply that it's the ethnic Macedonians that organized the Linden Uprising, and it's going to be a big blow in the face of the Bulgarian quote-unquote propaganda, end quote, And so that's the buzz that it creates, and it does create the buzz, Metokolowski went several days later on a TV show, a radio show, Channel 77 with Stolenomov, and he explained that it's a watered down version, that they are probably aware that it's not going to happen for the September of this year, but he's hoping to get it for the September of next year. And I can tell him and you and everybody else that I'm very confident that it'll have exactly the same fate and destiny. And I think Met is also aware of that. But you have to understand that this noise is created because of the constitutional amendments that are on the table in North Macedonia. And what they're trying to do is, of course, they're trying to find recognition. And this is, of course, again, President Pendarovsky is very right. These are people who have weak national identity, what they call it, a labaf nationalen identitet. So they have weak national identity and they're looking for constant reaffirmation. I don't need to have my identity reaffirmed. I don't think you do need, but they need, And so the German parliament adopted a resolution, which was very, very precise, very clear, saying, hey, we recognize this Macedonian nation identity and culture. It contributes to the diversity in Europe, which is a very, very reasonable language, a language that I don't think any reasonable person would have objection against. Problem is that Meto and the people around UMD are trying to slipstream recognition of facts that are not validated by world historiography. And of course, that's when they realize and they know that this is just not going to go through. But thanks to Professor Chepreganov and the book that he gave me and the National Archive, I did last night some tracing through the Yugoslav documents and can confidently say that I think I might have discovered the first ethnic Macedonians in America. And this is an organization called the Macedonian People's League in America. This was a left-leaning communist/socialist organization, and in 1935 they adopted the first resolution, which they condemned the fascist dictatorship of Yugoslavia, and they talk about the Yugoslavian and the Macedonian people. Maybe 1935, accidentally, this is a year after the 1934 comment. But I'm not saying that.
I'm sure there's no connection between the two at all.
Yeah, I'll let the folks to discover it. And then in 1937, I actually can read the names of the individuals who were. So the president of that organization, the communist organization, is the Macedonian People's Congress. It's the president who was elected in 1937. Smile Voidanov from Pontiac, Michigan. Geo Pirinsky, the father of George Georgy Pirinsky. Kovachev, Pupov, Pashov, Popov, Gushev, etc. Karpechu, Vishim, Popov. So these were probably, and in 1937 they adopted a resolution which drew a distinction between the Bulgarian and the Yugoslav people. So they're clearly drawing that distinction already. So I could say that between 1935 and 1938, we already find in official documents of groups that identifies themselves. Now, Geo Pirinsky was probably one of those with quote-unquote Labov identitet, weak national identity, because he switched, and they switched many times back and forth, during that period, and we are very blunt and honest. But I think we found the first Macedonians, and I'm going to tell that I hope Meto and the UMD people watch it, because we found it. I know one of our other friends, Goce Pangovski, went and recognized Smile Voidanov and gave him a recognition. And so that's, I have no objection whatsoever. And I can confirm that Smile Voidanov was probably among the first ethnic, at least during substantial part of his life, late part of his life, ethnic Macedonians. But before you celebrate Smile Voidanov, I want to tell you that it's the same textbook, has a very interesting document in which the Yugoslavs write a telegram to Belgrade in which they explain pretty much their strategy. The strategy is to resist MPO and Mikhailov because they see them as the greatest threat, and to try to align with the Protogerov and the Macedonian Patriotic League of Smile Voidanov. They recognize that Protogerov's wing is kind of weak, and Smile Voidanov's communists are even weaker. And at this point, all of them are anti-Yugoslav. But there is some prospects and hope that if we give and allocate funds and support them, that most likely they will switch sides, So I would be very careful before I celebrate it to see who the Yugoslavs aligned with during the period when one of the bloodiest periods in Macedonian history, and how this first ethnic Macedonians were treated by the Yugoslav authorities as documented in the official Yugoslav documents. But we need to know these facts, and we need to be aware of these facts, before moving forward.
And none of those ethnic Macedonians from 1935, I didn't hear a single one with a last name ending in ski, other than Pirinsky, but that's not a family name, is it? It's interesting because according to Meto Kolosky on Bogdan Ilievsky's show, the MPO was originally a Macedonian organization, not a Bulgarian organization or a Macedonian-Bulgarian organization, because he made the implication in the show that the MPO in recent years is attempting to Bulgarize a purely Macedonian organization, which I did a whole, I think it was an almost 1 hour long video going through some of the original MPO documents and some of the precursor organizations to the MPO. And it's very clear that is a Bulgarian organization, a Macedonian Bulgarian organization, which was in existence, 13 years prior to the one that you just named. So it's kind of hard to, have it both ways when that's the first ethnic Macedonian organization that comes over a decade after the MPO. So I know the ethnic Macedonians, the Macedonians are always trying to lay claim to the MPO, but they always find themselves on weak ground with those arguments because, like I said, it's very clear from anyone who looks at the original documents and who those people were that that's not an ethnic Macedonian organization. I see a lot of times they'll play video clips from that time period where they have banners saying Macedonian for the Macedonians, but again, that's not what that phrase means. It's one of the most misused phrases, I think, by Macedonists. But Macedonia for the Macedonians means people from the geographic region of Macedonia should control their own region as opposed to outsiders. There's no ethnic designation to the term Macedonian, the phrase Macedonia for the Macedonians. So interesting.
Again, just Serbian diplomats and Serbian agents in the United States are very clear what that means, and that of course they don't like the idea of Macedonia for the Macedonians because it's clearly a territorial claim on the Vardar Banovina, on the southern Serbia, But so they don't like it. But what it's really very interesting is that they said, you know what? we don't like them at all, especially when they wave the Vlado Chernozemsky flag,
Right.
MPO, who is the assassin of our beloved king, the
Right.
horrible assassin of our Krvnik, of our beloved king,
Right.
But then it's interesting that MPO once in 1940, because the documents spread up to early 1940s, when situation changed in 1940-41, MPO, and then of course there's an opportunity for Bulgaria to take control over and rule over Varder Macedonia. MPO switches sides and says, now Macedonia for the Macedonians is toned down, and it is switched to we support actually the Macedonia under Bulgarian rule, and it's very clear that the Serb agents described. Plus, they have all the speeches that were delivered by Petar Racev, by others, and it's like, and the speeches are very clear. They say, I know we're Bulgarians and we're loyal to Bulgaria, but at this point, our best bet is Macedonia for the Macedonia. And in the speeches at the MPO conventions, each of which are very well documented here, Belgrade knew what was going on. It clearly said that, yes, that's Macedonia for the Macedonians means independence as a tool of obtaining rule, self-governance and rule away from Belgrade, so that's the patriotism. But he wasn't questioning their Bulgarian identity, or Macedono-Bulgarian, I should say, identity. But they also emphasized always the Macedonian patriotism, and that has to be very clearly said, and it's clearly
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you, since you're a member of the MPO and I'm not, can you talk a little bit about some of the current developments there? I know there's been some public controversies surrounding some dueling, let's say, ideas within the organization. I know our friend Drago from the Chicago chapter, Peter, got in a little bit of I know he posted some letters that he got from the Central Committee where they accused him of maybe being a little too pro-Bulgarian, this and that. So you being a member of that organization, can you give us a little bit, as much as you can, information on some of the, I guess, the dueling ideologies in there and some of maybe the internal conflicts between certain members, certain ideas?
So I am not, I would not comment on specific MPO members and
Sure.
the MPO leadership and their relations. What I mean, if anything, this shows that there's actually an open-ended spirit and discussion within the organization. There are different visions, and what I can say is that I know the folks at MPO Pirin. Again, I stay in touch with them. I cannot talk about individual MPO Pirin members, but we've worked together on HR 741. We've worked together on other initiatives, including through our friends in Corridor 8. They're passionate. They love Macedonia. Majority of them recognize modern-day Macedonian identity exists. I've not heard, particularly from the top leadership of this chapter, that they're questioning the identity, the language, and etc. What they're questioning is the genesis, and the story behind that, and they're very passionate, going back to the 1950s and 60s, when MPO was firmly pro-Bulgarian, pro-Macedonian Bulgarian, anti-communist, and anti-communist Bulgarian also, we should say, stand when it comes. Members of MPO, and not only Drago, but others as well, have reminded us about the legacy of that, and they have remained passionate about that. Now, my understanding is that MPO leadership, based on some conversations that I've had, wants to move a little bit away from that fight, and it makes sense, to tone it down. I am also in favor of reconciliation. You have to understand. I've said that many times here at Corridor 8. I believe in friendship. I believe in partnering with the Macedon-American community here in the United States, and I believe also in partnering between the Macedonians, ethnic Macedonians in the Republic today, and ethnic Bulgarians of any kind of descent in Bulgaria or anywhere around the globe. So generally, love trumps hate, That's what I believe in also. Now, that being said, my understanding from the leadership is you can't have love trumps, you can't have love, and reconciliation without agreeing on some basic principles. I don't want to go into the details, but Priscilla Hayner, in her work on transnational justice, provided basically an outline of what reconciliation looks like, and that the communities, the parties that reconcile, need to answer the question how the past is dealt into in the public sphere. What are the relations between the former opponents? Is there one version of the past or many? And how basically the past is treated. So academic literature, academic scholarship on reconciliation clearly says that if you have a different visions about what happened in the past, and we have at this point with the so-called Titovci. I don't like to use that word, but that is as accurate description as it could be. It could be a little bit offensive. I apologize if somebody has been offended. But supporters of modern day Macedonist version of the past and history, they're called by MPO Titovci, you know.
I think it's a little bit
it's
inaccurate
offensive
to every. Well, I mean, offensive, you know, is
and I apologize for that.
No. That's what I'm trying to say is I think there's a misconception sometimes that everyone who is pro-Macedonist, who has this ideology, is kind of based in the comes from that Yugoslav project of Macedonism. But I mean, there's plenty of, you know, Macedonian nationalists today who despise Tito and are very anti-communist as well. So I think it's a little bit inaccurate that to group them all in as Titovci. I think there's definitely a strain of
and some of them are Antichki. Yeah, you could add
I think that
Antichki and the Titovci and the
I think the quote-unquote Antichki are probably the more prevalent form of Macedonism today. I think as people from the Yugoslav era just frankly die off. I mean, we're going to see that kind of that form of Macedonism disappear, and you're going to have just much more of the kind of Gruevski, Antichki kind of Macedonism, which I think is a separate strain, this ancient Macedonism from the Slavic Macedonism of Tito. But that was just a side note, just a tangent.
And I completely agree with you. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that there's plenty of academic literature that says and validates the fact that for the reconciliation to work out, we need first and foremost to make sure that we have an agreement on what happened. That's why you need to have the truth, and the truth helps us to get to the reconciliation, you know. But fact-finding, truth in the sense of fact-finding, establishing what occurred during certain periods, you know. So my conversation with different members of the Central Committee, with the leadership, has indicated that they, and I'm going to quote, I don't want to quote names, but I can quote the phrases that they use, is they need to recognize their Bulgarian roots, you know. In other words, there needs to be some sort of general understanding about who we are, what our past and what our legacy is. And I have not seen any indication in which MPO is signaling that they're going to have reconciliation with anybody without any unprincipled reconciliation, without following any principles, you know. And so I'm proud to say that, not only that, but I think MPO looks at MPO period as a very viable, very lively, very supportive chapter. And what I've been told, I've been under the impression, is that they want to continue the dialogue and conversation with them. And I think the dialogue and conversation with different chapters is what would make this organization viable in the future. But again, it's a organization of Bulgarians who immigrated from the geographic region of Macedonia. It's an organization that have always stayed on sort of pro-Bulgarian positions, you know. It's an organization that is rebranding itself in the next 100 years. So it's reviewing its bylaws. And from what I have seen as the revisions of the bylaws, it exactly takes the good old Imaro principles that Macedonian is anybody who originates from the geographic region of Macedonia. And anybody who originates from the geographic region of Macedonia is welcome to the organizations. But the organization was founded by Macedonian Bulgarians, or Bulgarians who came from the geographic region of Macedonia. there should not be any fake news and many misunderstandings there. I understand many on all different communities are a little bit nervous, but again, MPO wants to reach out also to those people. My understanding is, first of all, this is going to be sort of the old retired community of ladies and gentlemen in say in the Toronto area, in other communities of who might have veered off from their Macedonian Bulgarian and want to emphasize more of their Macedonian identity and the possibility of them coming back to the organization and becoming more actively engaged. And that's a wonderful idea, I think. Again, under the understanding that they need to recognize that whatever their modern day identity is, that there's a history behind this organization, and the history indicates that we have a common and shared historical, cultural, linguistic, and etc. legacy. So I'm confident that with this formula, with this framework, the organization can move forward and become more influential, first in North America, but also in the relations. So we've also proposed some amendments that are going to emphasize, sort of rebrand the idea of Macedonia, Switzerland in the Balkans, which is again,
I was going to say it's a bit of an outdated,
So
idea.
The way I have suggested, and this has been my idea, and I'm sharing with you now, listeners, is that the only Switzerland, the only confederation in the Balkans that can be done, it's a confederation within the European Union. So that positions, of course, MPO as sort of the most passionately pro-European organizations, in North America. So this is a full and complete integration of every single bit of the Balkans into a close integration into some sort of a confederate structure, and so at least some indication to that could be the idea that full Euro-Atlantic integration of the geographic region of Macedonia, because it hasn't happened yet, and it's going to be a very difficult process, is something that I would like to see in the bylaws. MPO Pirin made that proposal. Again, I should say MPO Pirin is the most pro-Europeanist faction in that organization at this point. And the other thing is that MPO has accepted and has reaffirmed that European and Euro-Atlantic integration should happen under the current existing condition, with the Prespa, with the Ohrid, and with the Ilinden treaties. These are the treaties with Bulgaria, with Greece, and the Ohrid is the treaty with the ethnic Albanians, because that's the framework in which European and Euro-Atlantic integration and of Republic of North Macedonia can progress. Now, UMD says we support NATO, support the EU, but we don't support any of these treaties. We're against any of these four treaties. So this is where MPO differs in the foreign policy side. MPO supports these treaties because they're instruments, they're tools through which Macedonia can become part of the EU and NATO, and will become the idea of the Confederation of Europe will be realized in the Balkans. MPO says we're against it. UMD says we're against the treaties, but we're still in favor of the integration. There is no pathway. A pathway, again, I should repeat the American ambassador in Skopje, that Macedonia can become an EU member while not complying or following any of these treaties and implementing them is fake news. Again, I repeat it, fake news. There's no story, no way that Macedonia can become an EU member without complying with these treaties, without implementing these treaties. And that's why MPO takes a firm stand. We support these treaties because these treaties will get us into the EU. And so while UMD says we don't support the treaties and we support some imaginary integration, while MPO supports a real touchable, integration that can actually, ustvarljiva, as you can get, that can be realized, that can happen.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a bit here. I've heard a lot of Macedonians say that there's no way to implement the terms of the Bulgaria treaty because there's no specific terms to be implemented, whereas Prespa and then the Ohrid Framework Agreement have kind of more specific provisions in them. The Bulgarian treaty from 2017, which I've read, it is quite vague. I mean, there's not a lot of specific things to implement. So I think a lot of Macedonians who I've listened to, talked to, basically view that agreement as kind of a blank check given to Bulgaria to implement whatever. Uh, Bulgaria can make whatever demand it wants and say, well, it's a part of this agreement because you guys agreed to friendship, cooperation, so on and so forth. So maybe it's a good opportunity to kind of transition into what exactly the Bulgarian demands are, because there's a lot of confusion around exactly what Bulgaria wants, what its demands are, this and that. So can you give us a firm idea of, at this point in time, because I think there's been different demands over the past few years, if you want to call them demands. So what are we talking about as Bulgaria's conditions to lifting the veto or the blockade? And maybe you can also, along those lines, let us know what is the proper way to refer to the veto from your point of view, because a lot of times when I or other people say the Bulgarian veto, Bulgarians will say, well, there's no veto, it's not a veto, this and that. So what is the perspective on Bulgaria as far as what is often referred to as the veto? What's the Bulgarian perspective on that, blockade to the European Union accession process?
So I'll tell you my reading, not the official Bulgarian government's reading, because I'm not a spokesperson for the
Sure.
Bulgarian government. But a couple of things. Let me just clarify a couple of things. Yes, true. The treaty was very vague, and it's very vague because Bulgarian position was not very. It's the idea was that the treaty is about friendship, cooperation, and uh,
Good
good neighborly
neighborly relations.
relations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in this treaties, generally they're drafted like this, And the idea is if we start working in close cooperation, we discover for each other, who we are, and then we build bridges, we build trust, things are going to work automatically. It's kind of the so-called spin-off process in cooperation theory. Problem is that we're dealing with, and Bulgarians are gradually learning that over the course of the last 30 years, a very difficult political elite, and because they were not very specifically written, unlike the Greek treaty, there was sort of more of a general framework how things will proceed. So one of Bulgaria's major problems was that we have a big differences about interpreting historical past, the ethnogenesis of the Macedonian nation, the relationship with the Bulgarian nation, the Bulgarian, the Macedonian characteristics of this, and of course the number of events that were related with the late throughout the 19th and early 20th century, all the way until, let's say, the First War, the Balkan Wars or the First World War. We have a big differences. It's how do we read this narrative? Bulgaria has its own sort of a little bit more nationalistic narrative, the national ideal that was never successful. And so we decided we're going to put a historical commission. Of course, Macedonists hate the idea of discussing that with anybody, hate the idea of somebody questioning their narrative at all, but they accepted that. I mean, the government of Zaev at that time accepted that. And of course, Zaev was sending a lot of good signals. He himself, as Dragi Karov said, his grandfather had a clear Bulgarian identity, or like Macedonian-Bulgarian identity, so probably Zaev had an idea about that, and so he was very clear of sending. He was even sending a lot stronger message, like we're the same people. This is documented on TV. He's trying to speak Bulgarian when he goes to Sofia, or he went to Sofia, but his Bulgarian was more like Strumica Petric dialect than actual codified Bulgarian, because the guy has never studied, and that's okay. But so there was a lot of trust. But the problem is, of course, he's leader of the Social Democratic Party, Social Democratic Union, and the Social Democrats go into election cycles. And so he decided to go into this 2020 elections, and in this 2020 elections, because generally making concessions to the historical narrative in favor of Bulgaria would be considered very damaging in the political landscape in Macedonia, for everybody who knows, for majority of people, including many of the voters of the Social Democratic Union. So they made good progress for the first 2 years, and then they decided to pause this progress. Now, that was the time when the negotiating framework started emerging, particularly in 2020. The first was under the German presidency, and then the Portuguese presidency in 21, early 21. So those two so Bulgaria at this point looked and said, listen, this thing about the historical commissions, the way we imagine it, we're going to sit down and talk it up quickly and just come up with a couple of quick statements, put it in Bulgarian and in most importantly, in Macedonian textbook. That's quietly, that's not going to work this way. And most importantly, because Zaev says, well, I don't control this process, and rightly so. I want to help you. You're my brothers. We're Sushnaro, the same people, but I don't control this process. It's the historians. The historians say, oh, we want to have a multiple perspectives, whether Earth is flat or whether Earth is round, we can have a conversation about this. And so what happened is Bulgarians at this point said, okay, so this is how inconsistent Bulgarian policy is. Oh, we understand that this general framework doesn't work in our interest. We want a specific framework. How do we guarantee that this will be implemented, and that if we if they don't change their textbooks, that we have a legal mechanism to force them to do that? And so they said, okay, we want to have that built into the negotiating framework, So the negotiating framework will have to say, we want historical commission and history, Gotsadelchev is a Bulgarian, and then everything else. So at the first two steps in 2000, 2020, and 21, indeed, that Bulgarian proposal was not accepted by the majority of the council. So the way that it works is the European Council makes that decision to adopt the framework, but it's the presidency, the country that presides over, in this case was Germany and then Portugal, the one that initiated it. In both of those cases, it was just Bulgarian demands. So to have that put into the negotiating framework didn't work. And that's why Bulgaria did not approve the negotiating framework. So technically, Bulgaria never said that they were against starting negotiations, but they used veto on the negotiating framework, which is a veto on the opening of negotiations.
Sure.
That led us to 2022, when the Europeans tried to find a compromise. And so the compromise was, 21, actually, Bulgaria formulated its main demands. And so all of a sudden, first demand was, which is very heavily criticized, and rightly so, by many intellectuals, including Viktor Kanzurov, who's been on this podcast. And I agree with him that for 3,504 Bulgarians, having them written in the constitution, which is again not the actual document, but on the, what he calls it, the front side, on the front side of this constitutional framework, as a separate nation with some right. There are rights that come with it. Don't get me wrong. There are rights that come with it. It's not in and of itself the greatest accomplishment or the greatest guarantee, for them, but it's some form of recognition. And as I've said it many times, I support this demand only for the reason that now you can't say that I don't recognize them, because there's Macedonian people and there's Bulgarian as a group of people, So we draw this distinction, and we recognize them, that Bulgarians exist and that they're distinct from modern day, which they are modern day Macedonian, not 1880s, And so this became from an additional, the so-called +1 demand, which came from a group of Macedonian Bulgarians or ethnic Bulgarians from the Republic, how representative they are, it's a whole different question. It's generally a big question: who represents the Bulgarians in Macedonia? Well, they're not capable of organizing themselves to get political representation, and so different groups claim representation, but they are again, to quote Viktor Kanzurov, one-man shows, and that's exactly right. I don't have any questions about that. But they're Macedonian Bulgarians, and we care about them, and that has to be clearly said. So the main 4 demands that Bulgaria wanted to have incorporated was, first of all, notable progress on the Joint Historical Commission, and more active engagement of Skopje. Because it's a historical commission, it's driven by historians, and because politicians cannot make a decision, you expect historians to make a decision, but they have to want to make a progress toward. And again, I have to clarify here that while there's people in Bulgaria who might have problem with whether it's identity, nationality. Majority of and the official Bulgarian position is accepting that, both the language, which they call norm, of course, not a codified language, but a linguistic norm, might be offensive, might be, but it's an acceptance of difference, there's an interpretative declaration to it. There's also an interpretative declaration and a protocol that Bulgaria has explained how history has played out. And again, it's a one-sided and not always a very accurate document. And I have expressed my criticisms about those documents as well. But all of those documents attest to recognition of the present day reality of different identities, which is something that has been terribly exploited by the Macedonists, but at the same time, it necessitates the conversation on clearing the history, the problems of the history. That's something we need to do. We need to clear history. And again, you have to understand that the context in which this common and shared history operates is that the general myth is that Bulgarians are trying to assimilate Macedonians. No, because as much as we recognize the differences, this distinct characteristics that we have today, we also have to recognize things that bring us together. Common and shared historical, cultural, social, etc. legacy recognized by the Commission through the acts of the Commission is part of European values, because European nations should be brought together, and one of the ways to bring them together is to writing up a historical narrative that brings them together. We have a lot in common from the Middle Ages to basically present day that can bring us together, not in a way that can make Bulgarians Macedonians or Macedonians Bulgarians or the other way around, whatever way, but in a way that shows we have a lot of things in common. We have common shared legacies and roots, and we should cherish those legacies, common and shared legacies, and that's the European value. That's number one requirement. Number two requirement is rehabilitations of the victims of communism. So Bulgaria is particularly sensitive. The European Parliament is sensitive, and Macedonia, as Professor Chepraganov also made that in that show, is very much, they're trying to recognize that, but also brush it off. And again, this constitutional debate that happened in the last couple of months, if anything, again, opened the floodgate, how Bulgarians were treated and were sort of the bad boys. They never wanted a modern day Macedonian state. They rejected the Macedonian state, which is not true. There was Panko Brashlarov. There was a whole bunch of people who were at the ASNOM, who had in one way or another, even Chento himself, even if they had a Macedonian identity, they did not see it necessarily as something in conflict with the Bulgarian identity or closely connected with their Bulgarian roots, And we know that from a number of letters that they've written. The whole Macedonian Communist Party, most of them were cooperating with the Bulgarian communists on the grounds that they felt them much more closer than the Serbian communists, Anyway, this is something that you've and others have made a lot of videos. I don't want to get into this stuff, but what we want to say, and we want to say that, yes, a lot of people in the Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia after 1944 were repressed based on their Bulgarian identity. Not only the Bulgarian identity, but many of them were repressed. And so what we want to do is we want to get these people rehabilitated. We want to have how exactly Bulgarian demands, again, are not very specific. But in the end of the day, it's something that the two countries, and particularly it's up to the Macedonian side, the Macedonian government to decide. Most importantly, Bulgaria wants to declassify the archives of the state security services, the so-called UDBA. And the last thing is the hate speech, that we've talked about, Kirill, and this is going to work out, So again, why do we need to change the Bulgarian fascist occupier or the nasty Bulgarian hand? Because this is not how the spirit is, And in Europe, you can't call them fascist occupiers and nasty hands, people who are your neighbors, If you want to recognize that they're fascist, you can call them fascist, even though that might not be always accurate. And what they did was a bad thing, and bad things happened, as I've said but you don't have to identify their national identity. Because again, this is indoctrination of the present day generation, just like past generations, in sort of hating. That worked in Yugoslavia because the idea was to build a Macedonian identity that is not only distinct but counter to the Bulgarian identity in case Bulgaria takes over control of Macedonia. But in Europe, we don't want that, because in the modern day European architecture, that has to go away. And so
Let me ask you I think maybe if you go back to that slide.
This one, yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe you've misnumbered 3 and 4 there, but in any
Yes,
case,
my
what
bad.
is numbered number 3, the final one, prevention of hate speech? Let me ask you, what is that intended to look like in practice? What are we talking about with the term prevention?
So this is very good, good point. Again, one of those general things, how do you prevent it? It's clearly not, and I am also against the censorship. It's like,
Right.
unless somebody's bluntly spreading misinformation on social media, then there ought to be a way that social media this is a problem of social media, that are just becoming a tool, a vehicle of misinformation. That's not what we're talking about. But there's 2 things that I can tell you that, again, I have to also go ahead and interpret that on my own. So first of all, there is a clear visible element, which is the science. There's a science of all these monuments that Bulgaria says you don't have to say this person was killed, Muchetu was killed, or Vera Ciriviri Trena, who committed a suicide after she was persecuted by the Bulgarian fascist occupier. I think in the Reka district, there were several Serboman villages in the First World War and of course, war crimes happened. A large number of peasants were killed. And the phrase that they used for that is a nasty Bulgarian. Here's like so many villagers were killed by the nasty Bulgarian hand. So there's a number of those, in Štip, that's the Petar Kolev example. Vanchu Prke, I think, was the guy who was, again, a communist in that region, after whom there's like a whole bunch of things named after. And then there's an insignia or a sign at the school named after him, that he was first killed by the terrible, nasty Bulgarians, and that this also place was where terrible Bulgarians kept in a prison cells poor ethnic Macedonians during World War II and tortured them as a part of the fascist Bulgarian occupation of Macedonia. So
I get that I get that it would be improper, I guess, to have state funded or state sponsored monuments, plaques, what have you, that contain that type of language. But I guess my main concern with that point is, are we talking about criminal prosecution of individuals who may say offensive things? Because
no,
I mean, I personally find the term hate speech a bit Orwellian. I despise the concept of hate speech. I think I'm a free speech absolutist. I frankly don't care if what individual people have to say offends other people. It's just grow up or get a thicker skin about it or whatever. But I guess a lot of people's concern is that we're going to have in North Macedonia the criminal prosecution of people who write Tata on Facebook or a YouTube comment, which I agree is not, I'm not promoting that type of language, obviously, but I also don't believe it's grounds for a criminal prosecution. So I think I hope what Bulgaria doesn't envision is a scenario where sometimes someone criticizes Bulgaria, even with the derogatory terms, that they're subject to criminal prosecution. I mean, there's places in Europe where certain topics are simply off the table for discussion unless you want to be criminally prosecuted. I think that's a fear that that type of speech regime will be introduced in Macedonia. So I guess my question is whether that's Bulgaria's vision as part of that demand is the stifling of individual speech.
So my understanding of hate speech is mostly that this is about those placards and signs in front of public monuments and offices. Now, they have had a conversation. One of the protocols is that they will basically notify each other. So if a soccer fan goes and says Macedonia is Bulgarian, screw you. And that's a polite way of saying that. then the Macedonian ministry has a way to react, and then Bulgarian ministry takes and says, please guys, don't curse on Macedonian TV and don't claim Macedonia is Bulgarian
Okay.
because we don't live in the 1890s, uh, that's my understanding of how the mechanism, and vice versa. When um, something happens, Bulgarian government again notifies them, and then so that's how this whole mechanism is. It's more of a bureaucratic mechanism. What I think it's very important, and I've raised that issue at many different levels, is that we have to understand that the public discourse in North Macedonia, in the public sphere, by opinion makers. These are, whether they're journalists, whether they are public individuals, usually affiliated and gravitating with one of the two main political parties, tend to spread information that is inaccurate, manipulative, sometimes complete lies, fake news, like there's another negotiating framework to be agreed upon. One person that I would blunt and honest is Peter Bogojski. Peter Bogojski is one of the people who spreads probably the biggest amount of misinformation. You can't tell him shut up, but all you can do is you can study, document that, and debunk
Mhm.
his lies
Sure.
on public media. And so this is the problem that we have actually. Putting it as a demand and operationalizing is two different things. But again, I'm going to bring Jack Snyder from Voting to Violence. And Jack Snyder is one of those people who talks about the manipulative elites in former Yugoslavia.
Before we do that, I'm going to cut you off. I just want to, before we move off this slide, I guess I kind of want to just give my opinion on, in case the audience is curious about what I think of these demands.
Mhm.
Again, like I just said, I mean, the last one, the hate speech, I don't really care about that
Mhm.
particular demand. That's me personally. I'm not saying that, uh, it's completely illegitimate. If we're again simply talking about monuments, commemorative plaques, things like that, that's fine. I think that should be a little bit clear, as
Mhm.
we're not talking about the speech of individuals. Um, the middle three, the Joint Commission, the rehabilitation of the victims of communism, and the declassification of the UDBA archives, I think those should be the main demands. My biggest problem with these is number one, what you have, not literally number one, but the main demand, the first one listed there, the constitutional amendment for Bulgarians as a constitutive national group in North Macedonia. So this might be a controversial statement because I think a lot of Macedonian Bulgarians that I see online, they're constantly pushing this, and I recently watched the um, Corridor 8, Corridor Osam episode that had Petar Kolev on there. And
Mhm.
I mean, he was basically, I don't want to say denouncing, but he was, had a negative opinion about people who uh, don't think this is important or, want to
Mhm.
discount this demand. I guess I would fall into that group because I think it's before, and I discussed this with Victor Konzurov a couple times when he was on here. Him and I have the same opinion on this. At first, I was like, okay, whatever, I can take it or leave it. It's not a big deal. I don't think it really is going to have much effect on the ground, but it's not a bad demand to have. At this point, I think I'm just going to come out and say I'm against it because of how much energy and focus and attention it's taken away from the other demands, mainly the historically related demands. I don't think that it achieves anything. I know people might say, okay, it gives certain rights, this and that. That's fine, but I ultimately don't think it's very useful, especially when it's detracting from the historically related
Mhm.
demands. And I asked when I sent in some questions to the chat to Peter Kolev when he was on Corridor 8, I would say that he ignored um, most of my
Mhm.
questions. He did because Georgi read them out to him, and he ignored most of my questions and concerns regarding the adding Bulgarians in the constitution. But he did address, I guess, my concern that it would draw attention away from the historical demands. And his answer was basically, the historical demands are boring. They don't draw much attention from the European community. It's too difficult to argue on those demands. We should be arguing instead on the ground of human rights, minority rights, hate speech, basically these kind of progressive ideals that will draw more attention from the European community, that are more in vogue. You can say they're those types of issues, human rights, minority rights, carry a lot more political currency than historical disputes. So therefore, we should focus on those types of issues. And I couldn't disagree more. I think it's a bit. I'm not. I've never met Petar Kolev. I can't say I'm a big fan. I've never have been one. I don't really have the best opinions of him. Again, I've never met him, never talked to him. Just from what I've seen, I would say that I find that a bit of a cowardly statement to say that, well, this issue that is really the crux of our dispute is too difficult to argue on, so therefore we're going to move off this ground and fight an easier battle, that being human rights, minority rights, hate speech, because it's easier and because it's more palatable for the European Union, despite the fact that that really doesn't solve anything, doesn't solve the core of the dispute between Macedonians and Bulgarians. You're basically creating a problem, or exaggerating a problem in order to fix it, to look like you're doing something, when in reality you're leaving the core issues on the table unresolved, those being the historical issues. And I'm very much opposed to, again, before I didn't really care one way or the other about adding Bulgarians to the constitution. Now I'm just out of spite opposed to it, I guess, because I feel that so much attention is being directed towards that particular demand. I mean, to begin with, I think the solution to the, and I said this to Petar in the comments on that Corridor 8 video, I think the solution is simply to remove all ethnicities from the Macedonian constitution altogether. Just make it a civic constitution where the people who have the rights guaranteed under the constitution are citizens of the Republic of North Macedonia. I don't see any reason to have a laundry list of never-ending ethnic groups as part of a preamble to the constitution. The American constitution doesn't work that way. The Bulgarian constitution doesn't work that way. The Greek constitution doesn't work that way. I don't know why we're simply, I mean, by adding Bulgarians to the preamble of the Macedonian constitution, we're in a way legitimizing this retrograde, like Soviet era style constitution that Macedonia still has, wherein we should be just arguing that we should just leave it at citizens of North Macedonia. Not that there aren't ethnic groups there, obviously there are, but you can respect all of them at the same time by simply stating the citizens of North Macedonia. My other problem with that interview, this is my opportunity to go off on Petar Kolev a little bit now that I have the floor. I mean, I simply, if we go, and I'll encourage people to watch that video, those who understand Bulgarian. I know it's not my entire audience, but for those of you who understand Bulgarian, go watch that video, because I think that Corridor 8 video, because I think his ideas and his proposals are very counterproductive. For example, the idea, as far as I understood from Petar Kolev, is we'll have the Bulgarians included in the constitution, therefore they're secured certain rights, and then at that point we will use Bulgaria's leverage in the European Union to secure some sort of affirmative action regime within North Macedonia, where these Bulgarians then are promoted to bureaucratic, governmental, certain positions through, again, a kind of an affirmative action regime saying there should be this percentage of Bulgarians, or Bulgarians need to be represented in this and that. And I mean, on paper or on first glance, that might sound okay. But the problem here is that in the long term, I think all that will do is ghettoize the Bulgarians, ethnic Bulgarians in Macedonia, turn them into a hated minority, and create a lot of resentment towards them. I mean, as someone who lives in the United States, and you live here as well, and I know we had a little bit of a debate on this ourselves on Corridor Osum, but I think when you have those type of affirmative action regimes, quota systems, it breeds a lot of resentment, because now, let's say you're an ethnic Macedonian, there's 3,500 officially Bulgarians, and now a neighboring state, which you have a current dispute with, is leveraging its power in the European Union to take this small group of people and promote them to certain positions at the disadvantage of ethnic Macedonians there. And I don't think there's a long-term conception here of how much ethnic resentment that's going to breed. We see that ethnic resentment directed towards the Albanians for the past 20 years based on a
Mhm.
similar type of regime. However, I think Petar Kolev envisions that the Bulgarians will achieve the successes the Albanians have. However, there's not nearly as many Bulgarians in Macedonia as there are Albanians. Bulgarians in Macedonia do not have nearly the international support that the Albanians enjoy.
Mhm.
We don't have to get into that now, but I think it's been clear over the past 20 years that Albania has certain international support that contributes to its domestic successes in Macedonia. So, and again, the attitude of most Macedonians towards Albanians, I would say, is not positive. So I don't know what the end goal here is, other than to create a hated minority within North Macedonia that is, again, resented for whatever achievements it's going to achieve. And I guess Petar Kolev, the other problem I have with them is, while many Macedonians have this fear that, well, there's a never-ending stream of Bulgarian demands. Once one demand is set, I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm just, I listen to a lot of Macedonian podcasts, interview shows, this and that. So this is what their rhetoric is.
True.
There's a never-ending stream of Bulgarian demands, and there's no guarantee from Bulgaria that the adding of the Bulgarians in the constitution will be the final demand. And there's a lot of Bulgarians who will say, no, that is the final demand. We just want to be respected, have our rights instead. And then Petar Kolev comes out on Corridor Osum and says, not only is it not the final demand, but it's the opening of the door to a series of endless demands that we will then achieve once we're in the Constitution, which is, even if that was your goal, I mean, stating that openly is such politically incompetent that you would just give away the whole game before you've even achieved it. I can't comprehend where he's coming from, what his end goal is. But Petar Kolev, I have a bit of difficulty expressing myself in Macedonian, but if he feels comfortable in English, he can come on here and we can debate that. He didn't really want to answer my questions when I was commenting through Corridor Osum, but maybe he can come on here and we can hash this out. But I really dislike at this point where this whole Bulgarians in the Constitution thing is going. Maybe I'm the last one. Maybe me and Victor Konzurov are going to die on this hill by ourselves. But I personally, at this point, just want to move away from that due to the attention is drawing away from the other demands and the redirecting of the dispute from its core issue, which is the interpretation of the historical reality, to this, human rights, minority rights thing, which again, I guess is more palatable in Europe, but it doesn't solve anything. You can, claim it's a win just to, throw a win on the board, but it's not going to solve anything. In a way, I think it's going to make things worse in the long run. One more thing I was going to say. I'll let you comment.
Can I quickly, think about what you wanted to say, and I'll just respond quickly. So first of all, I don't disagree on the fact that this, other than basically recognizing that modern day Macedonians and Bulgarians are different, this doesn't do as much, if anything. That's why this was never a Bulgarian demand until the +1 became number one, and it was done in this sort of murky waters when the president who we know, our Bulgarian president was, the Bulgarian president was somehow connected with the Russian intelligence services, maybe under their influence. He controlled for some time in the situation of a political vacuum in the country, the executive branch, and he was doing what is called the agenda setting on the Macedonian dispute. And that's how he somehow, under the influence of this community of folks, decided that the +1 will be number one, and a precondition. So I completely understand, and I agree that now we have to keep quiet. The Bulgarian government, even people like you and me, have to be very cautious about talking about history, because if we talk too much about history, this creates additional animosity, and it is not an enabling environment for the constitutional amendments to happen. I agree it is completely absurd to say that this is the last demand, as much as it is completely absurd to say that this is the first and the opening demand. The demands are the ones that we read them. Those are, and they have to, and it all goes down to history. The only thing that I differ from you, Kirill, is that bringing the constitutional amendment brought to surface all these arguments by constitutional scholars like Silianova, Silianovska, Davkovska, I think, and by politicians like Apasiev, by people from DPMNE, like Sashko Nikolovsky, who basically started claiming, oh, Bulgarians do not deserve to be treated like the others because of the historical
Sure. I mean, yeah,
narrative.
you have those excesses,
So
definitely. Yeah.
that actually showed us again, oh, wait, so you're not against discriminating people, but you discriminate Bulgarians because of the historical narrative. Here's we go back to the historical narrative, you know. So it kind of helped us show this. So there's a two-way street. And again, the question is, why does discrimination exist against those ghettoized ethnic Bulgarians in Macedonia? 3,504 people? Well, because, and why there are prejudices against? Because there's a narrative that denies them and their presence and existence on the territory of the geographic region. So that's a subtle element. So I hear some of your argument. I support it. I think there was far too much, there's been far too much energy going into that sense. But I think there's also a silver lining. And I'm going to be blunt and honest. I know a lot of people are going to watch it. There's also this in the silver lining is if the constitutional amendments don't go through, and they at this point of August 11th of 2023, there is no majority, enough votes, you know. That means that the whole integration process is going to end up, which will validate the Bulgarian argument that this country is not ready to go for EU membership. This political elite that manipulates using nationalism, as described by Jack Snyder, is actually validating once again that it's not worthy of becoming an EU member. And this is my challenge to them. Show me that you're worthy to become the EU member. Accept an implemented deal of the constitutional amendments, you know. So it becomes a very important litmus test. So that's something that I wanted to say. But I understand why it also takes away some of the focus and energy. And what I wanted to say is, if you don't mind, just because I don't want to take much of the time, but talk a little bit about the actual negotiation process, when constitutional amendments happen, and if that gate is actually open, how under the existing negotiating framework, which we have figured out it's the only good deal that is on the table, will proceed in the next number of years. So
yeah, the one thing, no, I agree. The one thing I was going to say that I lost my train of thought on is the reason why I don't think that and again, this should not be interpreted the wrong way. I'm not saying that the small number of people who identify themselves as ethnic Bulgarians in Macedonia are not important. If I was there, I'd probably, write myself down as an ethnic Bulgarian as well in the census. But I would say that the majority of the progress that could be made is actually with people who identify as ethnic Macedonians. I mean, there's probably more. I mean, I don't have a good number of this, so I don't have a survey or anything, but just simply talking to people, Macedonians in real life, and reading comments from Macedonians, people who consider themselves ethnic Macedonians in my comment sections of my videos, I would argue that there's almost certainly more people in Macedonia, North Macedonia, who identify themselves as ethnic Macedonians, who believe the same things we do about the history, who acknowledge a lot of the historical realities that we do. There's probably more of those people who refer to themselves as ethnic Macedonians and ethnic Bulgarians, as ironic as that may sound. There's people even like Lucha Georgievsky, the former prime minister, who obviously believes a lot of the same things we do, but says, I'm not an ethnic Bulgarian, I'm an ethnic Macedonian. So I think focusing on the small number of ethnic Bulgarians is a bit of a red herring, when a lot of progress can be made by focusing on simply, which has been my goal. I mean, that's the goal of my channel, is to get people who view themselves as ethnic Macedonians to acknowledge the objective common history between the Bulgarians and the Macedonians. And I think that is how the issue gets solved, not necessarily using those 3,500 ethnic Bulgarians as like a political tool to achieve certain, goals. I think focusing on the Macedonians and, promoting the common history, getting them to understand that they're maybe not so different to the Bulgarians. And I understand it's a longer process. That's not something that happens overnight with a resolution. That occurs, over decades, maybe even centuries, through a slow process of kind of rejoin the two people through a common understanding of the history. But I know it's not the sexiest or more the quickest way of doing things, but I think that's kind of the slow and steady route of simply saturating with facts and the correct historical narrative, getting the ethnic Macedonians to simply wake up to the common history. But I think a lot of the current stuff is really pushing the ethnic Macedonians to the side, kind of making them an enemy, drawing a firm distinction between ethnic Macedonians, ethnic Bulgarians, and kind of focusing on the rights of the ethnic Bulgarians. I just, again, I think that's a bit of a red herring and a misdirection of what needs to happen in order to kind of finally bridge the two modern ethnic groups. But that's all I have to say on that.
No, but Kirill, you're exactly right. I understand that this is one of the big risks of this structure that was ultimately agreed, and that's the big downside of it. I also am cognizant, and I'm recognizing in front of you, that Bulgaria actually is losing real bad this battle in the last 2 years, and that's why I am here. I'm coming also to with vocal, not only to tame the Macedonists, in their attempts to Macedonize the crap out of everything, but I'm also here to tame the Bulgarian nationalists in their attempts to Bulgarize everything, including to project it to modern day. And I want to tell all those ethnic Macedonians that are watching us here and elsewhere that I still love them, and I still remain committed in my understanding and preaching that we need to build bridges. I know we're actually getting further away from each other than closer to each other. I am aware of that. My heart is bleeding for that, and I'm going to do everything that I can for as long as I can live and breathe to make sure that we alter this pattern and we still get closer. Again, not one nation or one people, but get closer as two different nations with respect of each other's identities, nationalities, and characteristics in the name of our ancestors. I want to say that.
No, it's absolutely. I think one of your colleagues, your English colleagues in international relations, a professor, James Kurlindsey, he has a YouTube channel. I know a lot of my viewers watch him because when I go to my analytics, I can see what videos my viewers watch. And there was a video that he put out last year. He puts out videos on different, conflicts within international relations and geopolitics and stuff like that. And he made a video last year, I think it was in 2022, discussing the Macedonian Bulgarian dispute, and he actually made a comment similar to yours that a lot of Bulgarians got upset about, but I think it's just objectively true, is that in an attempt to bring the two nations together, the politicians in both nations created more hatred between the two people than existed prior to the dispute itself, which is one of the tragedies of the past few years, is that the more you attempt to come together, the more distant we become due to the way the actions of the different sides are interpreted, often in the most negative light possible. And, frankly, a lot of the politicians don't really help in smoothing out those misunderstandings. So I know you wanted to comment a bit about that too, and how maybe the elite in both nations have exacerbated the dispute instead of resolving it.
So two things. I don't disagree with it, but I also know that it's always darkest before sunrise,
Sure.
So it could be. And let's be honest, a lot of those frustration came as a result also of the historical narrative, whether they're dressed in human rights and constitutional amendments or in something else. It kind of goes back to the historical narratives. My take, there's a couple of things. So my take is that, drawing on again Jack Snyder's work, he argues that in the marketplace where there is not really a democracy, where democratization is underdeveloped, and my argument is that in the last 30 years, Macedonia has not democratized sufficiently, has not built robust institutions, something that was actually said by the US ambassador. We have political elites that want to fish basically for power and influence by manipulating the public. We particularly see that on the Macedonian nationalist bloc, the Dpmne party, which actually really names things after and cherishes people who had Bulgarian identity, like Hristo Tatarchev. Their main headquarters, party headquarters, is called the White house is called Hristo Tatarchev, but at the same time, they're the most anti-Bulgarian. So they call that Bulgarian dictate, Bulgarian dictatorship, and so this is why, because again, they're not a modern political party. They're not a rational political actor, or they are a rational political actor, but not in the traditional sense, in the sense that they're trying to use the manipulation as a way of gaining political influence. Now, they themselves are also subject to manipulation from other centers of power. I'll give you an example. One of their political leaders, Antonio Miloševski, for example, was one of the most pro-Bulgarian. If you listen to his 2004 speech, he tells you Todor Alexandrov is one great hero. He's recognized in Bulgaria. It's time to recognize him in Macedonia, because Macedonia wouldn't be what it is today without Todor Alexandrov. The same guy now is basically says, I'm not going to vote in favor of constitutional amendments under Bulgarian dictatorship, under Bulgarian dictate. Now, the reason why he's saying that, he either believes that we're the same people, which is a possibility, and that's why he refuses, or the other reason is maybe because there's like a whole bunch of documents that they have on file for him, that if he changes his opinion, breaks for the ranks, he may face criminal prosecution because some centers of power control. So that's how the political elite is controlled on the nationalist side. The political elite on the SDSM side, they're by default, their core of their voters is the so-called Titoist nest. This former Yugoslavia, Yugoslav legacy, etc. So Zaev tried to break away, but he knows that even his vision is kind of unique, sort of this, all the people, including Bulgarians, and love Trump's hate, and one society for everybody. Majority of people don't accept that in Macedonia, and that's why they're now pivoting away from Zaevism into a much more nationalist rhetoric. Milošević goes on a horse to Khrushchev and says, I am for the modern nationalism, the leader of the SDSM. So again, these elites, they're trying to follow the tailwind of Dopamine, and again, to use nationalist rhetoric to garner influence. Why? Because it pays off, And my argument here is that this political elite, particularly the political elite representing the ethnic Macedonians, is not ready and will not have the capacity to bring the country into the European Union. They are just inept, I think. So we have to be very clear. Macedonia can only become an EU member, but with a different political elite, a political elite that unfortunately does not exist right now. Over the course of maybe 10, 15 years, will that emerge? I don't know. But I wanted to say a few words, Kirill, and I apologize if I'm jumping ahead of you in the conversation, but I wanted to clarify the negotiations process, because there were also fake news spread there. And I spent some time to make some graphs like Foreign Minister Osmani. But so this is the three pillars of the framework. The first is the Stabilization Association Agreement, which was signed. True. And there's an annual review process of that stabilization, which means that the EU, through its parliament and through its commission, reviews and provides feedback as to how prepared Macedonia is and where it should make progress, on all areas of EU membership, There is also this thing called the Copenhagen criteria. These are the three criteria outlined in 93 that every country has to meet. One of them is the political criteria, which includes democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And that's why it is easier to talk about minority rights, because you immediately say, I'm talking about a political criteria. History is not there, but it could be, because that's my argument, that history is a part of the political criteria. Because if you have a conflicting historical narrative that does not correspond to the record of history, then there's got to be something about the democratic rule. There's got to be something about the rule of law. And it is also tied to the human rights of the people who accept that narrative and reject the mainstream narrative. Second is economic criterion, of course, market economy and competition. It's you have to basically be able to compete. And the third is the legal criterion. It has to adopt all the EU rules and procedures. And then, of course, for Macedonia, but it's not unique for Macedonia. It's every country that goes into the EU has to have good neighborly relations. If you don't get along with your neighbors, you don't have a place in the EU. And in the case of Macedonia, the three legal elements of this is the Ohrid Agreement, and this is where the civic constitution does not fit. I support the civic constitution. Let's wipe out all ethnicities and identities. That's been my suggestions for the MPO bylaws, that it's talk about Macedonians or anyone from the region of Macedonia, and that's what it should be, a citizen of the republic. That's it. Problem is that ethnic Albanians are not going to accept now, and they were not going to accept because they have certain special rights that are granted under the Ohrid agreement, the Badinter rule, the balancer for employment, for certain votings in the parliament have to happen with ethnic Albanians. They're never going to give it up. That's why to talk about civic constitution without getting the consent of the Albanians and the international community is just not realistic. It's pretty much as much of an accurate news, namely it's a fake news, much like negotiating a new negotiating framework. That's my understanding, not my understanding. It is a fact, unless there's an indication that somebody is willing to renegotiate that. The Linden or the Bulgarian agreement is tied to the protocols for the Historic Commission, the so-called hate speech that we talked about, the victims, and the opening of the UDBA files, which is a very important element. The problem is Macedonia cannot do it on their own because many of the UDBA files are in Belgrade also. So that is something you have to work with also. But it's important to know what happened, particularly for people who have died already, but at least to know that how they were prosecuted. So we're going to get a lot more accurate picture about political prosecution. Of course, the Prespa agreement, which includes the historical commission. I think the rest of the stuff has been hidden here, but there's also a naming issue, the tables, the signs, and etc. So much like in the Bulgarian part, there's labels and signs and tables and not documents, and in the Prespa there's also the documents, and it's on the Macedonian side to have North Macedonia. So here's how the process looks like. So I want to get a sense, because I think Bujar Osmani was not very accurate in depicting that. So he drew something similar, and I spent last night some time. So this is the precondition to enter into the actual second stage of negotiations, is to get the constitutional amendment. Again, I respect your disagreement with that. Don't disagree with you. I'm just accepting it as something that at this point is hard to change and reverse. It's impossible, in fact. So then I think Bulgaria has a lot of, so there's like 5 different clusters, 6, sorry: fundamentals, internal market, competitiveness, green agenda, resources, external relations. In those, the internal market, which is something that talks about generally competition and stuff like this, leveled competition, there's actually 2 chapters, one on science and one on education and culture. And this is where Bulgaria can put its demands that Macedonian educational system, particularly the history textbook and other social science textbooks, are not accurate. They're depicting Bulgaria's. Bulgaria could have gotten that leverage even without incorporating and explicitly mentioning the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation of 2017 in the negotiating framework. But having that in the negotiating framework and having the leverage here under the internal market cluster, there are 35 chapters, and there's, I think, 5 of those in the internal market, is an additional leverage. Not only that, Macedonia could do the changes, and sometimes Bulgaria doesn't like it, can put a veto, and it will send them back to start from the scratch, because the arrows go both ways. You can put a veto and then return them from the scratch,
Sure.
It doesn't mean that this process will go forever. You have to be reasonable in your demands, but there is a leverage here, and that's what I wanted to understand. There's also an additional leverage under the fundamentals and directly linked to the political criterion, namely the citizens' rights and the minority rights. There's a special charter that they will have to draft. There's a special document that they'll have to do. Of course, this is bureaucracy. Will that guarantee and create an actual mechanisms for rights? That's a different story. But if bureaucracy is focused on that, there is sufficient reason to believe that there might be a change happening. There might be a transformational capacity happening. Not under this elite. If this elite and this historical narrative is embraced, and if this elite envisions to defend the historical narrative, even though their own publications and documents run against it, then that's not going to happen. This EU negotiations process is not going to go anywhere. Hristo Nikovsky, the former ambassador, is right. We're not going to fulfill those conditions, period. But if you want to actually modernize your narrative, if you want to do things that are closer to the documents, This can happen. And it's the choice that the elite will have to make. Do they want to alter this pattern and get out of this manipulation viciousness and move forward? Or they want to stick with nationalism? This is the big question. And this is going to happen only after constitutional amendments are implemented. So fundamental rights and citizens, so there's a couple of chapters where the EU has the leverage. Plus, the rights of the citizens and minorities are going to be included in the annual reports. So that's where the parliament and the commission, Bulgaria will have the opportunity. So Bulgaria can veto the opening of each of these clusters, and the chapters can veto the closing. So if Bulgarian demands, for example, for textbooks are not fulfilled, even if Bulgaria will okay the opening of the internal market, it will not okay the closing of the internal market. Okay. If you don't close that cluster, you're not going to close negotiations. You have to finish all 35 chapters, close them successfully here. And so not only that, you can be sent back at a given point. If you say, promised you'll write the textbooks were never written, they'll send you back from scratch to negotiate. So once this is all 35 chapters are closed and clusters, what happens is that the Commission will make a recommendation, the Parliament will vote, and then it'll go to the European Council, where a consensus, including the Bulgarian Prime Minister or President, if we don't have a regular government, if we have a caretaker government, will have to vote in favor of accepting Macedonia. And then it goes to the Bulgarian Parliament and the 26 other parliaments to vote for the ratification, where usually the domestic rules apply. In the case of Bulgarian parliament, it's a simple majority, So you have like mechanisms to block every single opening here, every single closing here. You can send them back. You have a mechanisms to block it in the parliament. You have a mechanisms to block it in the council, where unanimity is required, and you have a mechanisms to block it in the ratification process. Now, I'm not saying that you should use that and you should abuse that. Bulgaria should abuse. But I think those are sufficient under the existing rules, unless Bulgaria decides to change its course and say, we don't care about history. There's a lot of leverage and a lot of mechanisms throughout this negotiating process to influence and foment change. Now, this is now in the EU level, because from the opening to the closing, it's the Commission that leads this process, moving through the arrows. Bulgarians can only monitor that, and other countries as well, and they can pose objections, or send them back. But that means, Bulgarian demands cannot be crazy. Kirill Topalov's crazy statements cannot enter into the Macedonian textbooks, because the European Commission says Bulgaria is unreasonable. Right. And Bulgaria cannot and should not afford to be unreasonable. And that's why I also entered in this conversation, that there's a lot softer way of saying, a lot more scientific and scholarly way of saying things, that rather than Macedonians are Bulgarians or were Bulgarians, right. Period, you should accept that you're Bulgarians, and stop trading yourself, being traitors, you betrayed your ancestors, That's not how it can be said, and that's not the right language, and it should be completely debunked, There's also a way to recognize that Macedonian regional identity existed always for a long time, which is consistent with the current narrative, but it never evolved to a national identity that we talked about. And so the idea of modern nations can only be traced in the first half of the 20th century. But of course, there's precursors to that, and we also know and recognize that. So it's a lot softer way of saying things that reasonable scientists, who hopefully scholars in Macedonia, will be empowered. And if that happens, I think we could actually see successful negotiations. And then the other thing I want to bust this myth, because it's been implemented, because we need to talk about history and all this stuff that has happened, and use possible mediation, which I am very much in favor of. We can't talk about the common market and the environment and all this other stuff that are important for the no. All of these things are important. Just like when you go to school, you study social sciences, you study humanities, you study natural sciences, you study all sciences together in order to become a whole person, So the same thing, in order to become a modern Macedonian state, you, my fellow Macedonians, will need to look up into your past and its historical narrative. You will need to find a better way to say that, along with transforming your economy, transforming your society, transforming your judiciary, your legal system, and ultimately get a better country. The question is, does this political elite want to have a better country, or they want to keep the status quo, control the judiciary, and continue doing patron-client relations and captured state, and basically turn this into a kleptocratic society? This is the big question that the Macedonian society have to answer now and today. And this is against the background of something that is extremely benign, whether there should be 3,504 Bulgarians put in the constitution or not, for which they will get zero to no rights, But the question that the elite will have to answer itself, maybe for first time more severely than ever in modern days, is, do they want to have modern Macedonia, different Macedonia, Republic of Macedonia, North Macedonia, whatever, or not? This is the elite will need to answer, because this elite with this mentality and this framework cannot, and I must repeat again, cannot bring Macedonia into the EU, not under Bulgaria, not under European, not under French, not under any other dictate. And I want to be very clear, and I want to use this opportunity to send this message through you and through your podcast to all our viewers.
Well, I think that's an excellent place to wrap up today. I think we do have our disagreements on certain topics, but I think these conversations, like I said in the past, are always productive and kind of hash out our different ideas, different perspectives on these topics. I appreciate you bringing a lot of the technical aspects of the EU accession process and explain that. I think a lot of times we kind of just refer to these processes very generally without understanding exactly, step by step what needs to happen and all the other considerations that go into that accession process, other than the specific demands from one nation state or another, be it Greece or Bulgaria or what have you. Professor Ivanov, thank you very much for coming back on the channel. I'm sure you'll be back in the future to discuss other developments as they occur. We'll keep an eye on Senate Resolution 311 to see where that goes. Obviously, like I said, the goal was to make September of this year Macedonian American Heritage Month. We're halfway through August already, so I guess unless the UMD can push it through in the next few weeks, probably isn't going to achieve its goals, but we'll keep you up to date on that, and I'm sure you'll be back to discuss other topics going on here in the diaspora. So, Professor Ivanov, is there anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up here today?
Well, I want to once again thank you and your viewers for the opportunity, for bearing with me for such a long time, for those who've made it that far. Thank you. And only one sentence that I want to say is that, yes, I know we face big challenges in Macedonia. They're not that big in the overall world politics, but these are challenges that we need to get resolved, not kick the can down the road to next generations. And again, thank you, many thanks to you and to your viewers for bearing with me and listening to my ramblings in the last almost 2 hours. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. All right, Professor Ivanov, you have a good day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.